Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space bonus. This is just for our Patreon, and today we are talking about another one of our post-apocalypse adventures. We're talking about The Last Battle, directed by Luc Besson and starring Jean Reno and some other people I hadn't really heard of. This is an early entry from Jean Reno, and I'll hold my point. But Julian, this was your choice.
You're just gonna hang that on me like an albatross, aren't you?
It's French, and it's in black and white.
Yeah, and there are 2 words of dialogue in the entire movie.
Yep.
Which is kind of cool. You know, I mean, it's a good idea. Yeah, I mean, I think that this is one of those things that it's important to see. You know, it's like an early Luc Besson. It's like his first feature film. I mean, this is the guy who did Valerian, for God's sake.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, he is an important director, and he did The Fifth Element. And, you know, this does feel like a freshman outgoing, though. I mean, this does feel a little film school.
It is. I felt this is to Luc Besson what THX 1138 is to George Lucas.
Mm-hmm.
That was my thinking. It's got good ideas. I mean, if I just read the plot, which is like a line and a half, in a post-apocalyptic future where no one is able to speak, the few remaining humans fight over resources in order to survive. That's a close kind of depiction, but it follows. This is the thing is because they can't talk. I do like this, to be fair, and I do. There's some elements I do like about this, but because they can't talk, they are referred to as the man, the doctor. So the man is Pierre Julevier, the doctor, Jean Boyce, the brute, Jean Reno, Fitzweber is captain, and then there's some additional cast later on. But I like the fact that, like you say, they can't communicate, so they don't have names because they can't give each other names. So in the cast, they are. But the man is a solitary figure who tries to steal some resources from a group of other people that are collecting water from a sort of a well or a large sort of underground thing. And then after doing so, he escapes and uses a microlight kind of plane that he's manufactured to escape them. And in landing, he injures himself, gets into a fight with Jean Reno's the Brute in another sort of, after finding somewhere to live, ends up in a kind of hospital with the doctor, but he's being kind of pursued by the Brute. This culminates in a final fight in which the Brute is overcome, and the man once again returns to where he came from on his microlight and takes over this group of people and finds a woman waiting for him, I think.
Yeah, she's sort of the concubine of the leader of that group.
Yeah.
In the meantime, there's another captive woman who the doctor is keeping captive. We don't know why, but she's killed by the Brute, and that's part of the sadness of the conclusion. So that's pretty much all there is to say.
Yeah. Well, as you said, it's kind of, it is that sort of film school kind of, you know, presentation. This is 1983, but one thing that sort of struck me, if you're going to remove the dialogue from a film, which is cool because it means that anybody can watch it, and as you know, we sort of said off screen, I watched this on archive.org as you sent me the link. You're kind of waiting for there to be subtitles. Thinking, I hope this has got subtitles, and it you know, doesn't need them. Don't worry about it. But if you're going to remove the dialogue, which allows for full exposition. And it does a relatively good job in some cases of providing you enough information to understand what's going on visually. But you've got to provide like an interesting soundscape or an interesting visual presentation that's going to keep me wanting to see what's going on. But it doesn't provide either of those either. There's an entire scene where the guy's like, after he's escaped, he's just wandering around a hotel bar kind of thing and making himself a bed, and then he's just sat around. I'm like, I think I get you trying to go for some sort of like sense of French ennui, maybe, but actually, I'm getting really bored very quickly with this
Yeah,
film.
I'm not bored with those parts.
Mhm.
Those parts remind me of some of the earlier films we've looked at, of sort of just people wandering through um, sort of post-apocalyptic settings. And these were like abandoned buildings in Paris,
Mm.
and there's a kind of like love of the aesthetics of the abandoned building, which I share, and I quite enjoy. So I don't know. I'm not bored by those sequences. I would say on the soundscape thing, this is 1983, and from the musical choices, like
Synth galore.
and look, I love the synthesizer. I probably like as many synthesizer dominant tracks as I do guitar dominant tracks, but yeah, this is pretty. Some of it sounds like elevator music,
Hmm.
like there's a point where they're running up the stairs and the sort of like 1980s action movie sounds kick in and you think like
Well,
you don't think this is a parody, but it's awfully close.
no, I have to say too, the music was composed by Eric Serra, who um, has a close ties with Luc Besson. He was the conductor and everything for The Fifth Element, The Professional, and a few others as well. So he's been quite closely tied with Luc Besson. Um, that moment that you mentioned about them running up the stairs, there's a couple of moments where there's a fight scene as well between the brute and the man, and it has a sort of like a sting, like it's a synthesizer, sort of like the music ramps up in a notch. And I had to check. This was 1983. I think um, the guy who did the music for the Terminator owes Eric Sarah some rights. Like there's at least a 30-second piece of music that sounds exceedingly like the chase music from the end of the Terminator. I was like, oh wow, like to the extent of like it put an image in my head. Um, so I was like, yeah, but so the music's okay actually. I think the music's it is 80s, but I kind of like synth music, so I was all right with
I do
it.
too. Yeah. I mean, I think you think it's more okay than I do. I mean,
Yeah.
it does remind me of whether it's the first Terminator or like Beverly Hills Cop or something where you're like, oh, like that
Boop
track is
boop
not
boop doo
aged.
doo doo. Yeah.
Well, no, no. I mean, I like that clip, but no, I mean, that's an example of like good synth music. I
Yeah.
mean, this is kind of I don't know. It's a little parody of 80s pop kind of stuff, which you don't expect in a really dark post-apocalyptic movie. Um, but there's stuff I like here. I mean, I like that you don't really know the characters' names, they're not speaking, the action is a little confusing. Sometimes you have to, figure out, what's going on because you're given clues, it's all there, but you have to piece it together
Yes.
because you don't have the dialogue. I mean, think of how much acclaim was given to A Quiet Place, which is a better movie on a lot of
Yeah.
levels. But I mean, this is doing that, that key aspect, and shot in black and white, and all of these sort of like interesting landscapes. I mean, I would say that I think the acting, while not bad, could be better, and I think that if you're gonna do this kind of thing, you want to have the characters emoting a little more,
It needs to
or
be it needs to be like a tad pantomimey
mm.
to yeah. But
But I mean, I don't think this is a bad or a poor movie. I think it's somewhere between meh and fine. Um,
No,
mhm,
no. It's I get what you mean. It's one of those things where it's when after I watched it, I thought, is it better than the sum of its parts? Like, yeah, does it hold together as a film? And I was like, for me, it doesn't. Like there's a plot there, but it's kind of hangs together. It's kind of perfunctory. It doesn't really matter. But there are scenes in this that I thought, oh, that's really good. Like the use of sort of emotive, facial expressions and hand gestures in place of dialogue works kind of well in certain scenes. For example, the scene where he goes to the group of people in the desert and they've got some guy trapped in the boot of a car and they get him out and he's sort of small enough that he gets sent down. He's got like glasses on. Like, he comes out in the sun. They put sunglasses on straight away so that he can go straight down the tunnel. They want to keep his eyes used to the darkness. And they send him underground so he can get water and all this other stuff. And he gets brought back up and gets put in the boot of the car. And there's a guy called the captain who sort of like he owns this guy, so he's in charge because of that.
mhm,
And so there's all those little bits. Oh, that's kind of cool. Like I like that. That feels very Mad Maxy. That's the kind of thing I'd
mhm,
expect in like Road Warrior or Thunderdome. So I like that as a choice, and I like our character. That again, this is like at the beginning of the film. I like more the first sort of 10 minutes, maybe. I think actually quite good. Maybe 15. Or he's in like an apartment building or an office building. That's where he's staying. That's where he lives. And all the little bits in that are kind of cool because he's building this microlight plane and he's going to escape in that. But yeah, there's other bits like there's background stuff. Again, so for example, like when they're in the hospital later in the film, and it's him and the doctor. There's this whole thing of like there's been cave paintings. I mean, like these paintings on the wall, and they start like cave paintings, like it's stick
mhm.
figures and things chasing deer or like bulls and buffalo, whatever. And then you see that like at that point, then later on, the doctor is doing a mural of a woman. It's obviously the woman that he's got held hostage in this hospital. But like you see that progression of paintings and stuff, and I was like, cool, that's a really cool background detail that sort of plays
Mhm.
into the story a little bit. But I like it as a detail. But there's so few of those little things that I'm like, they sort of that thing of like the water person and then these paintings stuff like that. Like there's not enough of that to me to go, this is weird enough, or this is holding together as a sort of a um an idea or a I don't know. Yeah, they stood out to me. Little else did, to be honest.
Yeah, I like the Doctor. I like the
Hmm.
Doctor stuff, I think the best. I really like the paintings. I like, that they look like the Lascaux cave paintings,
Yes.
which is French. Or at least on French territory. It's not meaningful French, but and this how nice that in all of the post-apocalyptic movies that we've seen, and we've seen a lot of just kind of like people wandering around landscapes that are destroyed, this has that. But in most of those, nobody ever creates art, right? Nobody's ever like, of course it would be the French one where they're painting on the wall, leave it to the French, left to their own devices, they will make art. Um, so I enjoyed that bit. I think the brute and the combat, is some of the least interesting to me.
Hmm.
Um, but I would say that, like, when we talked about some of the early post-apocalyptic stuff, I'm thinking like, the world, the flesh, and the devil, the last man on Earth, the Omega Man. I think this compares favorably, slightly to those as a group. I think that, um, this has, you know, the stuff that we liked about that tended to be people wandering landscapes and just figuring out stuff to do. This has that basically throughout. It's when those movies try to get into the plot that we didn't like them. Uh, I will watch, an hour and a half of somebody wandering through French destroyed landscapes and finding old bottles and, painting on the walls and stuff. And, it's got the weird French stuff of like, well, he's got a woman captive and, fish fall from the sky and later rocks. I mean, that's kind of the most weird thing in this.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's got those weird outre kind of French elements, and it's also got like a little bit of Mad Max thrown in. But I'm confused when you say you're not sure why some of this is happening or why we're getting that or what the plot is. I mean, a lot of what we've liked in some of those films have been the random, just kind of like, oh, here are some guys, you just come across them. And,
Yeah, I think maybe it's a case of
too far in the other direction.
yeah, careful what you wish for. I think maybe that's the case. I think you're right. I mean, you are, as I say, there are moments in this film I really like, and you've identified a couple like that opening scene where it's just him, and he's dressed, he's got the things on his legs, he's padded out, and then he sort of attacks this other group of people in this desert, this sort of like decimated desert landscape, and you know they're doing these weird things. They've got this little weird boy that goes down and collects the water, and I was like, oh, cool, this is going to be one of those things.
A French Mad Max.
Yeah, kind of thing where I'm going to get, and then, but even like his escape, where he glides off and he's going off in the desert, and he lands in this built up area. And again, when he's wandering around and you see these sort of decayed, sort of abandoned buildings, as you say, like some of the landscape, and that's interesting. I'm like, okay, cool, these are interesting buildings. There's some of the bits, and then it sort of keeps going. And I think the thing is, although I was, and you're right, there were certain elements of the Omega Man and Last Man on Earth and the others that we've sort of seen, where when it got into the plot, it kind of, it doesn't really know how to handle itself or where to go, but it gives you something to sort of like, it's almost as an interlude to the nothingness. Um, but because there's sort of like the nothingness and this sort of continues, it kind of sort of like I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Well, I need something else. And I think that's the problem is that again, if I was to sort of say it's almost a bit, yeah, it is. It's that thing of you say it's that thing of wandering the landscape. It is in parts, but then there's like, a 2 minute scene of them playing ping pong. And I'm like, cool. I could see this in any film. Like, I'm not sure why this is sort of, it's about boredom or whatever, but the oddities aren't odd enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're right. I get the counter with like the violence or other things in these other films where like, I would happily walk around Bartertown from Thunderdome for an hour and a half, because it's going to be like super weird. You'd get all these little bits and pieces, and they're going to go, right, we're going to go down to the underground now, and we're going to sort of see how that works. And I'll be like, oh, let's go watch that. Like, I'm happy to wander around this. But I think, again, because it's in black and white, and it's not shot especially well, in my opinion. Like, I don't feel that there's a visual style that's coming through. There's a couple of shots where I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. Where, for example, like the Doctor and the man are running down a corridor. It's obviously got a different sort of, they go through doorways, and the way it's sort of shot looks kind of cool. It's very central, and they're disappearing down it. But other than that, I don't feel there's a visual style that Luc Besson sort of becomes known for. That sort of, he has a style that you can recognize later. So yeah, there's bits there, but it's not good enough that I'm like, yeah, this weird. I'm happy to sit through this weirdness or blandness because it's not engaging enough.
Well, speaking as a somebody sympathetic to Buddhism, you must make your peace with nothingness, my friend. It's all nothingness in the end. I will agree with you 100% that walking through Bartertown for an hour and a half would be an awesome movie, and I would enjoy it more than this. Just all the stuff going on in the background, there'd be like little plots that you have to pay attention to, be like, oh, that's that same guy. He's after the other guy from earlier.
Yes.
The deal went bad, or it would be thoroughly entertaining movie,
Yeah.
and I think better. I will agree. The ping pong stuff is, tedious. There's other stuff that is tedious here for sure. Yeah, but I like for example, the Brute trying to break through the gate, and this his different schemes. And there's a gate inside, and then there's another gate inside that. It's a very low key version of Mad Max, but
Mm.
it's very realistic. It's not teed out to the nines like it would be in the it's covered with feathers and weird stuff, like
Yeah.
it would be in a Mad Max movie. But I do enjoy that stuff. I like the sort of sense of strategy there, and how sort of like unrelenting the Brute is, and how people are actually clever. It's not easily foiled. Uh, so I mean, I guess there's stuff that I like more than you. I mean, I agree with you that the shots of the landscape are not as beautiful as they should be, right? Like
Yes.
there should be more of a just kind of like love letter to the abandoned building here. And I think one problem is that like these abandoned buildings were shot in Paris, and then the desert stuff is shot somewhere else, and you really see, right?
Yeah.
Um, those are two environments that, unlike a Mad Max movie where you'd see them juxtaposed, they're clearly just different settings.
Yes.
But I mean, like, there's a shot where he opens a door in the hospital and it's just ruins, it's a doorway to nowhere, that's a good shot,
Mm.
and I do think that there are, these things to recommend it. And I guess maybe it comes back to, do you prefer how much of like, if it's a cliched plot with a few plot holes, is that better than um, a very minimal plot. There's still an
Well,
antagonist here, right? But
yes. Yes, there is, and I think it's an interesting sort of thing of what function do you put on dialogue in a film like this? Because you can tell the story, the plot and stuff is there. It's quite clear that there's a confrontation between the man and the brute. The man is injured. He ends up in this hospital with this doctor. But the doctor has also been, you've already seen that the doctor has been antagonizing the brute as well, because the brute's been leaving food out and he sort of, because he's wanting to get into the hospital. I'm assuming to get to this woman is the only thing. Like, there's a couple of things you have to assume. But generally, you get the information that's there. Like, it's there. But the thing that I find that this doesn't have, and this is what I'm saying about in a little bit more panto, a little bit more pantomime, is that, and the doctor's not bad at this. Like the doctor is probably the best at this. Is having he's got a character, like he's got a very characteristic face. Like you can see he's a character actor, like, and he is able to give a sort of a raise of an eyebrow or a certain smile or something, and it's a bit
yeah,
more different to the others. I would say like Jean Reno's a very good actor. I've seen him in quite a lot of things. I think he's very good. But in this, because he wants to keep him almost Terminator-esque, of sort of like he's kind of like relentless and sort of that's his job. That's all it is. So he's not there to be emotive. But even the man seems kind of
yeah,
devoid of
flat,
emotion, flat. So
yeah.
if I've not got dialogue to give me something, then I need character to perform. And bloody mime is French, is it
Hmm.
not?
Yes, that's
So
a very good point. I agree with you. I mean,
yeah,
I think both those characters are very flat. I was surprised when the doctor came in and suddenly, like, they're grunting, they're sort of like making indicative sounds. The
yeah,
doctor is so expressive, and I thought, oh, this is a big part of what I was missing from earlier in the film.
yeah,
Um, I really wanted that. And you think, it's strange to me what works and what doesn't.
yeah,
And I agree, like, I like a lot of the ideas here. I would sort of bump it up from some of those other kind of, middling films, because it has that idea, because it's doing something a little different. In the same way that, it makes me think about it and remember it later. In the same way that, like, The World, the Flesh, and the Devil, with its racial element, uh, I feel like that elevates it slightly. I
yes.
find myself thinking about those ideas. I could write an essay about it. I could write an essay about this. I'm not sure what my essay would be about, the last man on earth. Um, but so to me, those are kind of slightly elevated. But I mean, we're talking about a sort of very middling range of movies. Um, and it's weird to me what works and what doesn't in cinema.
Yeah.
Um, and I feel like this has a lot of there's a lot of good ideas, there's talent here, but like I agree that what I would want is like to see the man break down. Just see like him in profile, just holding his head. He doesn't have to be crying, but just holding his head, in this ruined landscape behind him. And it's just sort of, you see him limping after the fight, but you don't really, there's no glimpse into his internal suffering, right?
No.
All alone in this landscape.
And I think that's a really good point, is about the sort of getting into the inner, monologue, or the inner sort of like feelings of these characters, because we're not given. Yeah, I think you and I have said this of other films where they'll sort of, you know, the dialogue is so spoon feeding, where they're sort of like, "I'm unhappy with what is going on," and you go, "Yeah, show don't tell." Here's the perfect opportunity to be show don't tell, and you say about it's a good idea. It does kind of elevate it. Remove the dialogue. That's a good pitch. It's the kind of thing you'd have in a film studies class where you're going to make a film and you can have no dialogue, and you go, "Oh, that's interesting. How would we do that? How would we convey this? How would we convey that?" But it's almost like they said that, and then they just went, "Well, they're going to grunt, but we're going to carry on doing everything else as normal. We're just going to have,
Yeah.
You go, well, no. Again, this is an opportunity to really show expression, or like,
Well,
you know,
well, if you're going to think of this as a film school project, and you're entirely correct about this, you should think, all right, cinema is a visual medium primarily. Audio came later, right? We
yeah,
can tell this story in expressions. We can show a character's pain. We can give you more emotional depth to these characters than other movies with dialogue. And that's what we're going to show, damn it. And instead, it just kind of is like, well, it's into that kind of nothingness, as you say, like a kind of like weird Zen minimalism, of
yeah.
like you're not going to know who the characters are, what they're feeling, what there's no dialogue, it's just gonna be stuff.
Yeah, and I'm sure there must be films, and I haven't watched that many. I think of like The Artist. I think was actually a silent film, wasn't it? That
Mm.
sort of thing.
Hmm.
So it's been done again. Um, but again, like there are characters in films that have been mute, or have been silent, or whatever. Or there's been, and you said like A Quiet Place. I'm not the biggest fan of A Quiet Place. I think it works as a concept, but it's like I'm not sure why it's onto its third film. But there you go. But again, even in that film, having watched the first one, they use silence in a way that actually
Hmm.
raises tension. They introduce like sign language. So when they do speak and have certain things as to why, I mean, the silence is important. And so there's a scene in that film where Emily Blunt, who I will hold up as one of my favorite actresses, I think she's uh, massively underrated, but she gives birth in that film when she can't make sound because
Mm.
of what's going on. And it's the almost the opposite. This is the opposite. If they can't make sound in that film because of the monsters, because of the aliens and stuff, and they utilize that to the film to make you a tense horror sci-fi film. It works as a concept. It's very good. With this, it being the other way, if they can't talk, okay, well, then you've got to play it out to utilize
Mhm.
that lack of communication to do something else to raise the stakes. All right, they can't have dialogue. Okay, well, is this confrontation between the man and the brute a miscommunication because they've not been able to talk?
Mm. Hmm.
Is
Good
there a
idea.
is
That's
there a
not here in the film.
no? It's not. Is there a
Yeah.
possibility of that the doctor is hiding something, and he's and we will see it through visual means, and this other stuff. It's not going to be discussed. The lack of having not been able to talk should be a factor in how the story plays out and should be
Mhm.
expressed in some way, and it isn't. It just isn't, and that's kind of where I feel the most disappointment.
I agree with you. I agree with you about all of this, and I think that you know, we gesture more when you and I talk
Yes.
than the characters in this movie, and we can hear each other. Characters don't gesture, and you think anytime you have to be quiet, you gesture more, you
Mm.
emote more with your face, you adapt, you learn a kind of sign language, as you say. And this is not interested in any of that. And I agree that's its big failing. I would say I'm now convinced, after talking to you, the best scene in the entire movie is the one scene that breaks this. And that is where they do speak. And they use the gas. The doctor has this gas that lets him um, make sounds with his vocal cord somehow. And
Yes.
it's sort of like, oh, sure. Really rudimentary grunting like. And you can see for the first time, suddenly the man expresses emotion, and you can see the pain on his face as he's trying to make these words and what it means to him to speak even just this two syllables. And that is, weirdly, it's like suddenly they're emotional, and you see for a second like the weight of not being able to speak and the toll
Yes.
it's taken on them. And then it's right back to no emoting for the rest of the movie.
Stood around again. And I agree. That's a really good point. I mean, that is actually sort of foreshadowed slightly because at the very start of the film, we see that the man, before he flies off and before he even attacks um, the group in his original sort of location, he has a book. He tries to read out loud, and he really is. It just comes out as like a sort of really strained kind of grunt or gurgle, and he just throws the book away. He's like, why bother? So it's there, when it comes out. But you're right, like it should be more of like that scene's actually very good, as you say, like the introduction of the gas as a way of sort of like, trying to get around this, but it doesn't quite work. But it never plays into anything, or you know, has a factor into the finale. Like, if this was it's almost like Chekhov's gas. Like, all right, cool, you've introduced this. Like, maybe this could be a way of him defeating the brute, or communicating something at the end to the woman or to someone. I don't know, but like,
mm. hmm
yeah, it never feels fully thought out. This just feels like I've had this idea. We're gonna do this. Like, and again, no one sat down and gone. You say this a lot. It's like, what is it if you play it out to its natural conclusion? Like, if you play this out to its natural sort of like, end point, what are the things you'd be dealing with? You'd be dealing with the fact that like if you can't communicate verbally, then you'd have to have other forms of communication. You'd become, look at the animal kingdom. Like, you have some form of visual representation of your emotions, or like, the birds do a little mating dance, or bring they'll bring their wings forward and stuff in a sign of anger or
hmm
something. Like,
hmm
animals do this without verbal cues. So
or you come across a group and they all sort of like hiss at you like cats, and
yeah,
hold their hands out, and you're like, what the hell is this? Like, I intuitively understand that, but they've developed their own culture of, imitating birds or imitating cats or whatever, to
yeah.
have these expressions that aren't in your vocabulary, but you kind of still get the point.
Or like a series of knocks. I'd love it if there was that. That's what I'm
Mm,
saying. Like an
mm,
interesting landscape. You can't. All right, so the vocal cords don't work. All right, well, this one then has now got everyone carries around a wooden stick and a wooden block, and they're able to do tappings, and they sort of that's become their language in this place. And somebody else, because they can still blow air through, so someone else has got whistles or something else, semaphore bloody
mhm,
flags. I don't know.
mm.
Like, there's ways of
The
doing this.
whistles are a really good idea, right?
Yeah.
Like, calling out to each other in combat or something, like where are you, call and response kind of.
Mm. Yeah, so I feel like, this is that thing where like if you were to sit down with people like you and I would say, right, we're doing a film without dialogue. This is the story. It's post-apocalypse. Like, these are the things that come to mind. Okay, well, how are they going to
Mhm.
communicate? What's going to happen? How does this happen? Like, um,
What about putting bells on
yeah,
those people who are your property,
yeah, that'd be
like
cool.
collars with bells on them,
Yeah,
and you're
certain kinds of bell. That'd be really cool as well, wouldn't it? Like, yeah,
yeah.
this should have an interesting landscape. You know, to an extent that like almost like the soundtrack should be some sort of like diegetic noise that like
Mm,
the sounds of the landscape should end up becoming part of the music of the thing. Like, because if no one's talking and the world is And this was something I was kind of surprised I didn't. I was expecting if no one's talking and there's no machines and you've got these broken down places. I was like, all right, we're going to get a scene where like the wind's going to howl through something and it's going to sound like voices or it's going to sound like
Mm,
something. Like that would be, there's going to be something there's going to be a callback or something. It just feels like they don't experiment enough to warrant this kind of right. We're taking away dialogue, and you go, all right, cool. What are you going to do with that then?
right. No, you're right. I mean, it's a lack of thinking about the implications of your idea, right?
Yeah.
It's being in love with the idea. And that's the difference between a real idea and a gimmick, right?
Yes.
Ideas are cheap, ideas are easy, an idea is not a story, right? Um, I do think it's interesting. I'm glad that I saw it. I've always wanted to see this. I've never
Yeah.
seen it before. Can we talk about a few issues
Yeah.
before we
Go for it.
conclude? Okay, can we? The first one is the role of the mannequin. So the very first shot is is a guy, I believe it's the man, making love. I guess, can you say making love? Having sex with a
A
sex
sex
doll.
doll. Yeah.
And obviously this kind of dramatizes, I guess, his isolation. But it made me think about the role of mannequins in so many of these other movies,
Yes.
and I was thinking, it's even in the Umbrella Academy where, Five is in the future and he's, wandering around for 30 years and he's got a mannequin girlfriend. Like, it seems like, all the I Am Legend adaptations have it. There's this kind of like trope of the mannequin in a world where you're alone, which is
Yeah.
a cool idea. I like it, but what do you make of it?
It's interesting you say this because I've actually been watching um, Sweet Tooth, the Netflix
Mm,
show, and in the very first episode, they sort of have this thing where the kid Sweet Tooth is alone for a period of time and stuff where it all happens, and he ends up making like animal companions and stuff because that's what he's used to. But the narrator, there's sort of a piece of like there's a narrator kind of thing. Doing my James Brolin, good voice, it sounds all good. But it basically says in there a similar thing to this is, man's greatest enemy is loneliness. And it is this idea of like, if you're on your own, you say about the post-apocalyptic, but think of Castaway. Tom Hanks in Castaway, and he has Wilson, the volleyball. There is this notion, I think, we are a social animal. We are a pack animal, really. We are derived from apes. We are a part of the ape family. We are supposed to travel in packs for, a lot of it. We thrive off connection. And so I do think there's a real thing there of um these people when they're alone look for something that they can anthropomorphize and give it life, and they'll give it a name. I mean, I think we said this when we do, this is on for Patreon. So when we did the I Am Legend thing, I sort of said, look, one of my favorite scenes is after Will Smith's character, sort of after he loses the dog, and he sort of like he goes back to the video store and he tries to have the normal thing, and the thing that pushes him to have the real breakdown is when he sort of walks up to one of the mannequins and he's like, yeah, my friend said I should really reach out and talk to you, and he's really looking for something, someone to respond. And he obviously knows he's talking to a mannequin, but that moment of like breaking down. And I think that's the same, where it's sort of like, yes, of course, this is, him with a sex doll, but I think there's something there in the same way that like, but
mhm.
again, I don't know. Before I go on to the next bit, like, so what are your thoughts on that point of that?
Well, I mean, you have a family. I live alone and deal
Yeah,
with soul-crushing loneliness on a regular basis. Tried a pet, it
I'll
didn't work.
swap.
Well, see, that's what everyone says, right? Like
Yeah.
people with families are like, "Oh, you're free. You can do whatever you want." And I'm like, "Yeah, but what's it all about, Alfie?" I have to confess, I have thought about buying like a real doll, not to have sex with, but just to like put on a chair. like that's how lonely I am. Like I am full on
But
post-apocalyptic
thi-
like loneliness.
this is a real thing, though, isn't it? Like, we are a pack
Yeah.
animal. This is it. I think, we thrive on. Well, no, I'm not going to say, because there are introverts. Like, I think there are introverts listening to this probably at some point, going like, "No, screw you. I want to live in a cabin in the woods on my own." Um, but I think, I'm an extrovert. I consider, I think you have sort of, consider yourself an extrovert to some extent. Like, we have that thing of needing human interaction, and I think that's part of it, isn't it? I think in these films, one of the things that sort of is shown often, and I think this becomes a Hollywood thing. Let's just say as well, most action stars or stars of this nature are extroverted characters, and so they need that interaction. That's sort of, I think, a part of it. The thing that drives them to leave wherever they are is their extroversion in many cases. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's true. I think, I wonder if there might even be like a psychological study, like someone's been left alone long enough that all of a sudden, they'll start talking to a melon, or a chair, or
I do have stuffed
imaginary friends.
animals. They do have personalities. It's a thing that happens. No, I mean, and I will say, like, I think the stuff with the doctor tends to be the stuff I like most, and I like that the man, he kind of opens up a little. He sort of defies the doctor and shows himself to the woman, gives her a present. Um, and I thought that was very French. That kind of like, of course, I'm grateful for you nursing me back to health and giving me hospitality, but I'm also who I am, and I'm going
Yeah.
to be a little cheeky. Um, you can't stop somebody from being themselves. That did seem very French to me.
Mm.
But I like the way he sort of opens up a bit, and I think some of his tragedy at the end is that he's alone again, and the girl's been killed. I love that he puts his blinders on again and
Yes.
tries to retrace the steps of the girl, only to find her dead. Yeah, so the sense of loneliness, there is something to it in this
Yeah.
film.
And I think the loneliness is compounded by the inability to speak, isn't it? I think that's the thing, because um, again, you know, you could have two strangers in a room, and you might, what do they say? You can still be lonely in a crowd. You've got to have that communication in order to form a sort of a connection. And I think verbal, is a big part of that. But what did they say? That, verbal cues are only sort of like, 40% of the way you communicate. There's a
Mm.
lot of other stuff. And so, but I don't feel like that in the film. This is again, I'll go back to
Yeah.
but where's the other 60%? So yes. What was any other issues?
Let's talk about the role of women. So this has been
Mm,
an issue in several of these films, right?
yes.
Where I mean, we recently talked about a boy and his dog,
Yeah.
with quite misogynistic in places. Mad Max goes back and forth,
Yeah.
strong women, but also women as chattel. Um, here there are basically two female characters, and they're both imprisoned.
Yes.
I don't know what that woman's story is that the doctor is keeping her. He seems to have some affection for her because he's drawing her. Maybe he's just incarcerated her, but he doesn't seem to be that upset that the man is interested in her. He doesn't punish the man for doing it.
Yeah. I don't know. It's interesting, like you say, yeah, because for the longest time in this film, I was like, oh, all the women are dead, or they're not going to mention it. It's just going to be an all male cast, and it's going to be, you know, they can cast that away because it's a post-apocalyptic world, and they don't have to explain that, Um, but yeah, the moment they introduce the first woman, you're like, oh, and the fact as well is the way that they introduce her as well is you don't see her face for the longest time, she and it's just a hand that comes out, and it's a well manicured hand, and if
Yeah.
anything, the most pantomiming part of this film is her picking up things. There's a moment he puts the tray to the thing, and they have this sort of monologue of that, like her hand coming out, the fingers are moving, and there's like that feels more expressive than their faces. Um, so I don't know what she's there for or why. Um, and the doctor doesn't appear to be like, did he heal her like he healed the man at some point? but then he's sort of taken a liking to it. I don't know. And then you're right, but the women in this are captives. They're there for a purpose. They're there for to be owned. Yeah.
Yeah, girls in cages.
Does this go? I mean, yeah, Luc Besson has got allegations against him for later in life.
Really? I
Uh,
haven't followed.
yeah. So I don't know if this is a sort of
Well,
a slip
you
on
know
that
the
front.
French.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a shall we say, sort of like boys will be boys kind of attitude that is dying hard over there.
Mm.
And and has been very resistant to sort of like you know British American feminism.
Yeah.
At the same time, you have like the Fremen, and you have the female protests that have been great, um, but the government has kind of like oddly listened. So like feminism and these issues are always a little strange in France, right?
Yeah.
The poles are not the same. Um, but the other thing about her, I did think that kind of introduction of her through the window is very effectively done, where that's a female hand, right? And you're not entirely sure why you know it, but you know it, right? And then you sort of see her, and that there is a shot of her lying in bed with bare legs. That's very sort of like, if you want to talk about male gaze and sort of sexual
Yes.
objectification, I mean, she's an alluring prospect, right? I mean, if you think the men are not given inferiority, and allowed to emote, she's definitely not. And then she's there to die, right?
Mm.
To barely has a character.
Well, and again, you don't know how she died. You say about her being
I think
this.
the brute killed her.
Well, the brute killed her. That I'm comfortable with
Right.
that, but like you don't know. Let's put it this way: you don't know what else he did to her.
I see what you're driving at.
Because he does at one point, like why is he breaking in? Because he's trying to get into the place before the man turns up. He leaves food out, and he tries to sort of form a trap so he can get into the hospital. So it feels like he's trying to get to something inside the doctor's place. Other points. So I don't know. But when he does get in, like it sort of like shows. I think that's when it shows her legs, doesn't it? Sort of like, and it pans up, and the brute is looking through the sort of like the cage, like prison door. And he's not shown anything, so I don't really know much. But like the suggestion I took it was he sort of, again, it's male gaze, and this is a female-less world, and that he took advantage of that situation. But it doesn't say that expressly. It's not, I'm.
Well, and you could read that as like, he's the brute, right?
Yeah.
So he's raping her, and you could do a sort of like feminist reading of this. And then you have the concubine at the end, who's also in prison, by the captain, and the man who, by this point, is wearing a suit.
Yeah.
I did think this is very like, if we do think of this as like the French Mad Max in some ways, like the fact that he's stylish, the fact that like the doctor tells him to comb his hair before he goes down to see his female captive. I thought this is very French, right? Gotta look good when you're seeing your captive, right? There's no American in the world who would ever do that. Must present yourself well to the woman you're keeping as a slave, right?
I like that, the white suit, because it's the thing of like, it's almost like an authority, let's say uniform, but a status symbol, isn't it? Because the captain, who obviously runs the water, he's wearing like a white suit as well, and he has like a little sort of straw trilby or pot pie hat. So it's almost like a status thing, isn't it? And he's returning, and it shows like he's come back to take control, like he's there to be in charge. But yeah, he's more stylish than the captain. Like, he's like, well, I've got a newer suit. My suit has a waistcoat and it's nice.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And then the concubine kind of smiles, like he opens the door and smiles at her, and she smiles at him. She's basically a sex slave kept prisoner.
Yes.
Like, I'm not sure why she's so excited. Like
she's
it's
like,
not
oh,
somebody,
somebody different to rape me tonight. That's
yeah. I mean, that's kind of the implication. So that's a little uncomfortable.
Yes.
these are not the most progressive batch of movies, Scott.
No, I think there is an element here of when the world goes to shit, we become animals. Basically, I think is the a lot of the implications.
I do kind of think that this is, if I can compare this to anything, it would be like the first Mad Max.
Yes.
Like it is kind of setting up like the guy in the slightly tattered white suit, wandering through the French landscape, and like he's a do-gooder now in a way that he wasn't at the beginning, where he just wanted to steal the stuff.
Yeah.
Basically, that's his character arc, right? He goes back and liberates these people, whereas he just wanted their resources before. And it's because of his experience with the doctor and the brute and the girl. So this is sort of, his origin story, but we're not going to get any more.
Yeah, that's it. It's kind of like a Mad Max story, but it's kind of yeah. Any other issues or anything you want to
Okay.
sort of mention before you?
Final issue, we have to mention it rains fish,
Yes,
and
rocks.
which okay, I'm fine with raining fish. Like raining fish, I could say there was a water spout. This is a thing that happens sometimes, and then rocks fall and kill the doctor.
Mm.
It's done very well. I mean,
Mm.
obviously it's like not a single take, but it's clear that like they're throwing rocks down on the poor actor who's holding a metal sheet, and it falls out of his hands, and he grabs it real quick, probably because he is scared. But you know, this I thought it was shot very well, but it's at first I thought, is the brute up on the roof throwing rocks? No, it's just raining rocks. Um, that's harder for me to understand. It is sort of like a weird kind of magical realism element in this.
Yeah, the raining, as you agree, I agree actually. The raining fish, I accept because it's one of those things that sort of has been a part of, um, folklore and sort of like legend, isn't it? Sort of this idea that it'll rain frogs or fish or like because you say water spouts, and so it's a thing that it has happened. The rocks feels more like, is it linked with whatever destroyed? Is this the reason for the post-apocalypse? Like, these these weird events, like, is this actually an ecological film? Are we saying that there's, weather weirdness going on? Like, yeah, I don't know. It's an odd scene because I thought the same actually. I thought they were being attacked at one point, and I thought I agree. I thought exactly the same. I was like, oh, this is someone like the brute who's got more people and is attacking them. But no, it's odd. So
Yeah, there should be like an upward shot. And clearly the reason there isn't is you'd see, workmen up on the building throwing rocks down.
yeah,
But you should see like at least some directly overhead shot of a rock falling. So there's a kind of like odd lack of
well,
perspective there.
this comes to one of the other things you said about the way that this film is shot. We're used to, and I think we've said this, especially with sort of like A Boy and His Dog and some of the Mad Max films, and um, anywhere it's got this post-apocalyptic landscape, they will do the wide shots because that's always the
Mhm.
sort of the telling shot, or even like mid shots. They'll do those kinds of things because they're like, we want to show you the vistas, or we want to show you the wasteland, or we want to show you the wreckage. We're going to do that. One of the things I find with this film is it's very claustrophobic in the way it's shot.
Mhm.
Even when it's outside, as you sort of said, in those landscapes, the desert landscapes, it all feels very close quarters. Like it's not, you know, it's on a person. It's kind of like it moves from shot to shot to be on people rather than on the landscape. And I feel very much the same in, you get a lot of like chest and up shots repeatedly.
Mhm.
So the film feels very claustrophobic in that sense. So even I don't even get like a scale of like how big the building is or the hospital they're in or those kinds of things. It all feels very tight in on the people, which again, when you get things like the falling of the fish or the rocks, you go, oh cool, okay, well, how far away is it to the door? Or like,
Mhm.
those kinds of things. If it's a little bit too claustrophobic in that way.
Yeah, and I think that's just because, like if the camera pulled out, you'd see like a Parisian
Yeah.
arrondissement, just like, uh, you know, um, no, but I agree with you. And I think that if there's one thing these bizarre landscapes need, it's always that wide shot. you know. And even, I mean, I think the wide shot is underused even in contemporary movies. You know, I mean, there are a lot of times where I see those medium shots that you're describing, and I'll think, you know, give me the wide shot, let the character be buried in the landscape. You know, maybe that's just my Japanese spirit, you know.
Yeah.
But
No, I
I
feel
think
the
I
same.
always prefer it.
I think I feel the same. I think there's a lot of films where you think, oh yeah, pull out, let's see the world, let's see what's going on. So, okay, any final points then for the last battle?
I mean, again, I would say like, you know, we're in that range of kind of like this is not a great movie. I mean, some people love this movie, but at least I think it's doing something. I mean, I like some of its ideas, you know, but I do think you're right that its execution leaves a lot to be desired. Does it follow through on those ideas? Um, but then neither have some of those early movies we've talked about.
No,
So
I agree. I mean, you know, I agree. This is low budget, and so there are budgetary restraints on it, and I accept that as well. And there are scenes I really enjoy. You know, we go, that's cool. The cave paintings, as you said, sort of the development of those, and there's some, you know, some of the shots, very cool. But I think my problem is again, like, and I felt this. If you do kind of feel this to say, let's say with Mad Max. I mean, you say about the Last Man on Earth and stuff, they were following a sort of a literary, you know, source. They were something. I feel this a little bit with Mad Max in a similar way, in that when it goes off and does its own thing, and you sort of just got like, you know, oh, we're just going to ride around, or we're going to spend a lot of time with Toe Cutter. And we said the same thing then. It was sort of like there's some scenes that are really good, and you go, that's weird, and he's sort of taking control, and he's kind of charismatic. And there's other bits where you go, this should have been cut 30 seconds ago. Like it makes, you know, like, why is it still going? Um, so there's bits like that that I find, but to me, I just think this is, you know, Luc Besson. I've liked his later films. There's a lot of films, you know, that I've really enjoyed. Um, where I'm watching this, I think it is, as I said, this is what THX was to George Lucas, where we said the same thing. We were like, yeah, this is interesting. It's got some interesting ideas in it, but the execution's kind of, you know, sloppy. And there's some bits in this where it desperately needs an editor. Don't know why there's monkeys at the end of it. Don't, you know, the car chase makes no sense. Like there's all these bits and pieces where you're like, you know, this hasn't really been thought through because they're not an experienced filmmaker yet. And that's what this feels like to me, where you go, cool, yeah, like I say, it's a freshman outing, but I'm not going to laud it as a good film because there's so many things where I would be like, you know, sitting down and going, what about this? Why are we not doing that? You know, this doesn't cost money, but we should be doing these things. So yeah, interesting, but you know, I'd say a miss from my point of view. Anyway, we have got more to come. So what we've got? Oh, I just think about what we've got. So this is we've done the last battle. So we're traveling. We're back to England now. We're back to Britain. And this is to sort of pair up with what's been going on the main feed. So we're going to have done The Day After, which was the nuclear fear and the nuclear sort of terror film of the US. And on the next Patreon special, we're going to be doing Threads, which is kind of the British equivalent of The Day After, which terrified a generation of British school kids into thinking we're all going to die from nuclear fallout.
Yeah, and so we're almost at the midpoint
We are.
here on the main thread on the main feed, and we got even more Patreon stuff for you in the second half of the apocalypse.
Yeah.
So you know, going on with threads, and you know, quite a number of
Yeah.
Patreon exclusives for you in the back half of the season.
Well, yeah, and don't forget on the main feed, not only have we got another half of apocalypse movies with Delicatessens. We're back to France with a fascinating film.
Sorry.
No, I've seen Delicatessens, so I'm looking forward to revisiting that after many years. Tank Girl, bit Kevin Costner with The Postman. I couldn't do Waterworld without doing The Postman. Children Man, and The Road. So really, we're going to end on a really depressing note. We won't have to see again, but we are also doing, in a lead up to Alien Romulus, we're going to be doing the Alien films: Aliens, Alien 3, and Alien Resurrection, leading up to Alien Romulus. So anyway, hope you're enjoying this. Please make sure you do check out all the other Patreon goodies that you got access to, and feedback. Let us know what your thoughts on. If you've been able to watch this, it's on archive.org. Just look for, or just Google watch The Last Battle. It's in 2 parts on there. Go watch it and let us know what you think about this. Are we right? Are we wrong?
And thanks for supporting the Patreon. And, we really appreciate it. And, tell your friends, we're doing our very best to provide you with quality content and a lot of content on Patreon, and have plans to give you even more. So
yes,
we really encourage you, and thank you for that.
Spread.
We want to keep the lights on.
We do. Yes, we want to keep the lights on. Anyway, for now, Julian, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Good conversation. I enjoyed that. And ladies and gentlemen, as you say, thank you very much for your support. We greatly appreciate it, and we shall see you on the next episode.
There's something very important I forgot to tell you.
What?
Don't cross the streams.